Bruce, you must have something really good too.
Of course I do. It's Bruce Danielson, and I guess I'm here to entertain you too.
Good afternoon. I call to order the informational meeting of the City Council. It's March 23rd, 2021. Welcome to those watching online, on TV, or here in person. In lieu of a roll call of the City Council, I'll just recognize that we have 6 in attendance. We have Councillor Brecky in attendance telephonically, and Councillor Kiley is absent today. Just one note before we get started, we just need to be cognizant of our time because we do have a county meeting at 5 o'clock. So with that, let's move on to committee and commission reports. First is Siouxland Heritage Museum Board. Councillor Starr.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Appreciate it. Normal things going on at the museum system. The most interesting is that the number of weddings and events that are coming back. It is a big funder of the enterprise fund for the museum. So as more events come back online, even socially distanced and at half capacity, should help some of the things in the 2021 budget. The other thing that's interesting is that the Mountain Plains, I was going to do the acronym and I couldn't remember the acronym or the name without finding it in my notes. Mountain Plains Museum Association annual meeting is being held in Sioux Falls in September of 2021. So this fall there will be museum directors from across the center section of the country coming to Sioux Falls. It was an event that was scheduled for 2020 that has been rescheduled for 2021, and really a good way to show off our museum system, but also on the eastern side of South Dakota, there are events planned from USD at the Music Museum there, as well as a lot of the things that we have going on in our part of the country. And so it'll be a good sized event, somewhere between 350 and 500 people that'll be attending for a week. So as I'll say CVB because I can't remember Experience Sioux Falls yet. It's a good piece of business, as Terry would call it. So overall, the museum has also finished their recommended budget both for the county and for the city. So we'll be running through that part of the business as well. So I believe it's been submitted. I believe also that shortly there'll be a informational coming up with an annual report for the museum system where Director Hoskins will be here to brief us on how the year went prior to the budget hearings for 2021. So overall, the system's going good. And the other thing that always warms my heart is that there are plans to add additional trees to the Irene Hall Museum Resource Center. So out in that area of town, it's good to add that additional work. So there'll be some additional landscaping things that are happening. So that's exciting. The more trees we can plant in these days of Emerald Ash Borer, it's awesome. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes, there's not a lot of foliage out there, so it'll be nice to get some in that area. Councillor,
yes, Councillor Starr, I'm sure the meeting of museum directors from the central part of the states will be a historic meeting.
I got it. Should I laugh just to carry us?
Very good.
Nice question.
We need like a okay, that brings us to B, Urbanized Development Commission, UDC report. I will give that report. We just had a handful of small revisions to the highway plan. The only things of I guess, note I would bring up is we approved a Brandon bicycle and pedestrian master plan, and then the other thing that we approved, which is required for the federal government to release funds, is what they call the FTA 5310 funding recommendations, which essentially is money for mass transit and those with disabilities transit for those. And we had 2 people that we recommended for award. The first is Avera. As I recall, they're going to be providing rides for qualified individuals to appointments, primarily to clinics and facilities that they have that are outside of the paratransit service area. So that'll be very, very helpful for those patients. And then CCTS, who we contract for much of our paratransit rides, are going to expand their services even more, which will be great. And then they're also going to invest in a van so they can do some smaller transports and do some other private rides for people who need a wheelchair accessible van. So that is what we recommended. So that is that report. Next up, council remarks. Anyone with council remarks today? Not seeing any. We're going to move on to presentations. We have one presentation today, but it's a big one. The Sioux Falls for All initiative presented by Director Sean Pritchett, our Director of Finance. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Council Chair and Council members. Today, I am pleased to present to you the first phase of the Sioux Falls for All initiative, a series of one-time strategic investments for the community that is a culmination of several months of discussions beginning back in December, when we had the opportunity to engage with each of you individually to discuss potential priority projects. Sioux Falls is in a very unique position coming out of the pandemic, which has challenged the economy. But as a city, we have emerged from this period of uncertainty, not only weathering the storm, but from a position of strength, which is a reflection of the balanced approach that this city has taken over its finances over several decades, and allows us to direct financial resources available to us to make some unprecedented number of strategic investments here over the course of the next couple of years. Since we began meeting back in December, we were guided by a series of principles in terms of considering the types of investments to move forward. First and foremost, we were looking at one-time investments because these funds, as received, were also one-time, do not support a major or significant expansion of ongoing operations and expenses for the city government. In particular, one theme that resonated from the meetings with you was the potential for investments that leveraged private donations, maximizing the amount of projects that could be accomplished with the city's investment. We looked for balance between quality of life amenities that benefit our residents, but also continuing to invest in infrastructure, which fuels the economic growth for the community and creates jobs. Perhaps more unique, however, was a view toward equity and inclusion, which is particularly illuminated in a couple of projects that are being brought forward. Continuing to ensure equitable access to our parks, no matter what part of town you live in, no matter what your physical or sensory disabilities, was an important factor for the selection of the projects to be brought forward in this initial phase. And this is an initial phase. We have not committed all the funding that is available. We want to be thoughtful in the selection of these investments, and making good decisions can take time. In 2020, the city received reimbursement for qualified expenses through the local government COVID Relief Fund. This allowed the city to free up cash and provide an opportunity to make significant one-time investments that are both broad and diverse in scope, but centered on one, enhancing the financial strength of the city, and two, investing in long-term projects that will have tangible impact for our residents. Of the $47.7 million we were reimbursed for qualified expenses, we were able to direct existing cash to pay down $25 million in debt early, a decision that this council approved last year, and will result in dollars being freed up over the next 9 years for even more additional infrastructure and quality of life amenities. We ended last year with approximately $22 million of this freed up cash flow still available for allocation to key investments. And today we are bringing forward six specific projects as part of this presentation, which we will be requesting to move forward totaling $10.65 million. This presentation summarizes these requests, many of which have appeared before you at the informational meetings earlier this year and over the last several months. The opportunity to use existing financial resources to make additional strategic investments, as noted earlier, is unique. It's not the same for other communities. There is a certain level of burden that comes with this to ensure that we are making wise investments that will create a return for our community in the long term. And as we look back on the history of this city, there are certain decisions that have changed the trajectory of this city of Sioux Falls. For example, the decision to construct the Big Sioux diversion channel has paid for itself many times over the last many decades with the reduced impacts that it's had on flooding. And perhaps the most visible decisions our city made was to set aside the greenway along the Big Sioux River as part of green space, constructing a recreational trail, and more recently investing in the downtown River Greenway, which has transformed our downtown from a residential, business, and tourism perspective. The first key investment requested as part of the Sioux Falls for All initiative is continuation of this vision and designating funding to design Phase 3 of the River Greenway adjacent to the proposed redevelopment of the Sioux Steel property. This project also includes replacement of the Lowhead Dam, which is inside the Big Sioux River, which is a fairly unknown but critical asset that ensures adequate water levels throughout downtown. As part of Sioux Falls for All, we request $1 million to complete the final design of Phase 3 of Downtown River Greenway, which is expected to generate up to $185 million in private investment with the redevelopment of the Sioux Steel property. Design will take up to a year to complete, and it must be completed so that when construction occurs on the adjacent Sioux Steel property, that the city is ready to move forward with its planned investment in the Downtown River Greenway. It was recently announced that the Jacobson family graciously agreed to gift the city more than $2 million to assist in the development of a refrigerated skating loop and an inclusive playground, which will be located at Falls Park, not far from the Levitt and the proposed River Greenway improvements that we just spoke about. The inclusive playground would be available to all to use, but constructed specifically to be inclusive for children with sensory, cognitive, and physical disabilities. The project also includes the refrigerated skating loop to expand outdoor recreation activities for children and adults alike. The total project is estimated at $4 million, and we are requesting $2 million to support the city's investment and to match the private contribution being made by the Jacobson family to make this investment in two quality of life amenities that are unlike anything else you will find elsewhere in the region. Equity inclusion was a key decision point with regard to this next project, which proposes that the city invest $2 million to construct a spray park, dog park, walking loop, and other park enhancements at Hayward Park in West Sioux Falls. This project is being done in cooperation with the Sioux Falls School District, and both Leadership Sioux Falls and Promising Futures have both announced campaigns to raise up to $200,000 to assist with the playground enhancements. For those that have not been in this neighborhood, it is clearly evident that this is an area that is underserved in our community, particularly in terms of access for kids to summer aquatic facilities. The development of this park will go a long way to achieving more equitable access to outdoor recreation in this neighborhood, as well as for the community as a whole. There are exciting things happening at the Great Plains Zoo, and hospitality in general has been challenged this year as a result of the pandemic. So there is no better time for the city to step up in partnership with the zoo to provide $1.4 million to make the African exhibit expansion a reality. The city's investment will leverage over $6.6 million in private donations for the project. And I'll repeat that again. $1.4 million granted by the city will leverage $6.6 million in private donations that have been secured specifically for this expansion project. The zoo is a valued asset and a wonderful amenity, not only for our residents, but also for attracting visitors to Sioux Falls. And by investing in these facilities at the zoo, we are able to provide and support diverse experiences and appreciation for wildlife and ecosystems for those in our community. Finally, the last proposal is a request to direct $4 million in additional funding to our arterial streets expansion program to address the infrastructure needs resulting from the recent growth of this community, the need to coordinate with and keep up with newly constructed schools, and supporting the overall economic development needs of the community. There are a number of projects that are emerging as priorities that need to be moved forward, but the timely completion of these projects will place pressure on other infrastructure priorities such as street rehabilitation and reconstruction, bridge improvements, etc. A sampling of these emerging priorities necessitating the additional funding include the need in eastern Sioux Falls to address 57th Street between Veterans Parkway and 6 Mile Road. The need to expand South Cliff Avenue by a half mile south of 85th Street to serve as second proposed Harrisburg High School within the city limits of Sioux Falls. The need for improving arterial streets that are intersecting Veterans Parkway. As you might recall, the state, along with the city, made a significant announcement late last year with the state making a very financial significant announcement in terms of its investment in the completion of Veterans Parkway over the next several years. But the city's contribution to that will be addressing many of the arterial intersections that are occurring across the Veterans Parkway. Other projects also include the reconstruction of Minnesota Avenue and improving North Marion Road in order to properly serve the economic growth that's occurring at Foundation Park. Each project will require significant significant investment, and the amount requested will help the city to progress forward on several of these priority needs. I will note for you as council that both Director Carney and Director Cotter are both here in attendance today and can assist in answering any questions that you may have in regard to several of these projects. In totality, the proposed projects that are being brought forward here for council's consideration total $10.65 million. And you will note that this, we did not include some other projects or strategies that we talked about. One that was received a lot of positive response from you was transferring funds into our entertainment tax fund. That is a fund that's been probably most impacted as a result of the pandemic, resulting from the lower economic impacts or the higher economic impacts we've seen in the hospitality sector, which is the tax base for the entertainment tax. And in particular, a significant investment that's going to be necessary over the next several years at the Washington Pavilion. We are not bringing forward that request at this time for a particular reason. We are watching some other potential avenues that we may have for bringing that forward, alternatively with other funding, and so we want to allow that to mature and to make itself more known before we bring that particular project forward. So that is definitely still a priority for us, but something that would be brought forward for consideration in a future phase. Additionally, we will also continue to recognize other priority funding needs that are on the horizon for us, including investments in accessible housing in our community, as well as funding the actual construction for Phase 3 of the River Greenway. These will remain focuses and are areas we will be bringing forward for consideration in the months ahead. We do anticipate bringing forward a supplemental appropriation for council consideration and action on April 13th and April 20th to approve and obligate the funding for the projects that have been included or proposed as this initial phase for the Sioux Falls for All initiative. Before I conclude, I would like to turn it over to Councilor Selberg, who has been working with us over the past several months to discuss an important initiative and proposal for consideration as part of this Sioux Falls for All initiative as well. And I will stand by along with Director Cotter and Director Carney, and we'll be happy to answer any questions upon conclusion of his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Pritchett. I'll get right to it. I know we don't have a lot of time tonight, so I'll give my 5-minute spiel here. A concern that I have reached out and shared with all of you is a concern about the people out there who are quietly and secretly suffering behind closed doors from anxiety, depression, and addiction in its countless forms that are out there today. I believe it's an issue that was rocketing out of control before the days of COVID, and since then we have all seen plenty of stories and examples that show the issue has gone nuclear with the circumstances of the past year. With this in mind, it has been my intention to hopefully direct a portion of these funds that were directed at COVID relief towards this issue, which has been magnified by COVID. I'd like to see us make a concerted effort to give people who have for too long been contemplating asking for help an avenue to finally do so. A group of us have been working over the past few weeks in an effort to put the concept together that we will be previewing today. I'm going to be painting in broad strokes today. I'm not here to drop a policy manual in your laps, but do want to show that significant homework has been done to get this concept off on the right foot. So with that, I will move into the presentation of this program that we are calling the Operation Hope Fund. And as you can see up on the display, the Operation Hope Fund with a mission statement of providing discreet, immediate assistance and support to those in need. We're looking for a $500,000 appropriation for purpose of funding certain resources for people triaged through the link. The goal of this fund is to reduce financial and stigma barriers to optimize successful referrals in a secure, discreet manner. I think we will find that a number of people that take advantage of this program that come out to utilize it will they probably haven't come out before for financial reasons, but I think we're also going to find a number of folks, and hopefully we do find folks that also aren't coming out for, it could be stigma, could be pride, could be a number of reasons why they have not come forward and sought help. And what we're hoping to do with this program as we promote that is get those people to come out as well. We're modeling it and kind of modeled it after the One Sioux Falls Fund, kind of with the efficiency of it, where people came out with a need, they had a request, that request was reviewed rather quickly and approved and moved on. We're hoping as people come out and ask for help that we discreetly get them in here and get them in the right direction as soon as possible. If they've waited a while to step forward, we don't want it to linger and give them time to give it second thoughts and have things kind of clunk around as we go. So we're trying to get things moving as quick as we can. The ability for this fund to be accessible for patients through the case management team will foster greater success in the referral process and reduce the possible bottleneck for people who come to the link for psych urgent care. The idea is to have clinical staff who will assess and properly identify clients' needs as part of their assessment and then make plans for their care and considerations. Some example uses of the Operation Hope Fund: it could make payments or co-pays to increase access to health and behavioral health treatment services, possibly psychiatric evaluations. Could help with interim internet connection costs, possibly pay for a month or two to facilitate e-health therapy or connect to support services. Could possibly help with temporary or transitional housing to improve access to temporary care, and it could help with drug screening and co-pays. Could also help with transportation costs, bus fare, taxi, Uber, Lyft. Could be gas vouchers to and from treatment services. Temporary and interim help with purchase of medications. Temporary help with purchase of necessary medical supplies, an example being diabetic supplies. Some possible roles and responsibilities of those involved as we put this together. As stated before, the anticipated structure is modeled after the One Sioux Falls Fund. Funds will be held with the Community Foundation, but separate from the funds held on behalf of the link for operations and capital improvements. It's very important that if these funds are approved, they go to the mission at hand and they don't get diverted somewhere else or another, that they stay specific with the goal. The link board of directors would oversee the procedures and protocol of the fund. The link provider, in this case Avera, would assist in administrating the funds to individuals. The Community Foundation and the city would enter into an agreement establishing the scope of the foundation of the fund sometime in May, June, July as we head into summer of 2021. There's been some talk about, well, how much would go to each person as they come and they apply for this assistance. We don't have a number set in stone yet. We've talked about numbers such as $500. I think there'll be some flexibility in that used by those, the board that's administering this, and some counselors that are, using their discretion as we go along. In simple math, if we had $500,000 and we had $500 per person who used it, that's 1,000 individuals we're helping. So just doing it in good round math there. The tentative schedule for the Operation Hope Fund, this would hopefully be a part of the supplemental appropriation package, which we will be first reading on April 13th, second reading on the 20th. Again, the agreement between the City and Community Foundation would be brought to the Council for review and approval as we head into May, June, and July of this year. So this is the framework that we would be working from and developing over the next few weeks and months. I have reached out to each of you individually over the last few months and received your verbal support, and that is much appreciated. I'm looking for your support and a consensus that, again, this be included in the supplemental appropriation plan. Your help and input is certainly always welcome. I really truly believe this is a program that, if done right, could grow into something long-lasting. It could be long-reaching and really move the needle in regards to addiction and depression and make a major impact in countless lives. I really hope we can open our hands and our hearts to put those resources to help as many folks as we can who desperately need it. And I think we all know plenty of people who could. So I just take a quick moment to thank a few folks who've worked hard on this over the last few weeks. I'd point out Directors Franken and Directors Pritchett for their help and input, countless meetings that we've had. Thank you to Andy Patterson and his team at the Community Foundation for their input and support. Thank you to the Triage Board and the Link Project team for their enthusiastic support. That has meant a lot. I'd like to thank Councilor Erickson for her continued counsel and input on this subject. We've talked about this for months and months and even years. So thank you to everybody involved so far. I look forward to seeing where we could take this in the future. Appreciate your time and consideration, and with that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Selberg. We'll open it up to questions. We have Director Pritchett here. Questions for Councilor Selberg, and we also have Directors Cotter and Kearney. Questions, Councilor Sale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First off, thank you, Councilor Selberg, for your presentation. You have my wholehearted support on your presentation. Mr. Pritchard, I have a question about the Washington parapet. Now, last year, we had a presentation that we were told this is in dire straits, absolutely needed to be fixed. And now here we are not even addressing that. So you had alluded to additional outside funds coming for that. I would hope you would expand on why this is not included in phase one.
Sure. Well, we're not delaying the project, so it's in design currently. So previously, I believe last year, you allocated funds for the design, so that takes some time. Some of that was delayed a little bit due to COVID and not knowing exactly where revenues were going to be, but that design is moving forward. So we're not delaying the implementation of the project, but we are waiting a couple of months. Specifically, we're looking at the American Rescue Plan, which has some potential dedicated funding for local governments, and one of the eligibility criteria of that is revenue, to replace revenues that were lost. Well, our entertainment tax is probably one of our areas that we can draw down based on revenue loss and meet that eligibility criteria. And so we're waiting for Treasury to write guidance, which we would expect here over the next 2 months. We would expect some of that funding to be available to us as soon as 60 days from now, and we could bring back at this time. So we're not delaying the project at all. Simply put, this CARES Act money, that this local government assistance money is more flexible for us. So if we're able to utilize, we're just trying to put the pieces together to the best funding mechanisms to ensure that we can leverage all the available financial resources that we have available to us.
Well, I appreciate that, and I don't know if anybody else has, but I have certainly not read the whole American Rescue Plan that's coming out. But preliminary numbers that I've been provided is that we're going to get a significant amount of money for that. Now, the requests that the laundry list that the administration came up with and we've been working on for months, $20-some million for this, and we're only going to spend 10.65. Could you expand on why we would not invest the rest of that money in our community at this time?
Well, there's a number of pieces to that. First, it's very hard to get money out the door immediately, right? These projects take time conceptually to design and put forward. So, but the earlier you get forward to design, yes, you'd want to mobilize that funding quickly. One thing that we're watching carefully is we know that we have a river greenway that we would like to be able to finance, and maybe not have to bond in order to proceed forward. So we are watching the American Rescue Plan to determine how that's going to play in with everything and what our capabilities and capacities are going to be with that before we move forward with obligating additional funds from the CARES Act for that. The other thing we also have to be cognizant of, and I don't know to what extent this will have impacts for us, but there is a lot of money on the street right now seeking projects and because of the economic disturbance that occurred as a result of the pandemic, your commodity prices are going up significantly. And so we also have to be cognizant that sometimes waiting a little bit can actually save us money in the long run instead of getting too much money on the street and we're actually driving up the prices and not getting more for the dollars that we're spending. So this already is almost $11 million investment into the community, and I would expect that we'd be bringing forward something in the summer of this year that looks at the remainder of the funding that we're at, that is available to us at this time.
Thank you.
Councilor Erickson.
Thank you. Director Cotter, I have a couple questions in regards to the Arterial Street expansion. As you're coming up, I know we're seeing all the lovely potholes everywhere and know that we need to invest in the streets always. It's a basic need in my opinion, it's a basic need that when you drive on the streets, you want them to be well. As I'm looking at this $4 million expansion, I'm going to just give you a little bit of background, all things that you know, but just for my colleagues as we move forward. In our CIP book, the 85th and I-229 improvements are appropriated at $500,000. In the Arterial Streets Fund, we have $73.3 million, and then in the arterial intersection improvement, we have $5.3 million. Just a basic quick review of the CIP book and seeing some of those same street names. Are we using this money for any of the already appropriated CIP funding that is there?
Yeah, so as you look at that program, what we'll do is that we've got a number of just emerging needs. There's so much growth and activity. If you see some of the permit numbers that are coming out, we want to build with development so it's as efficient as possible. And then as well as just the explosive growth that's happening in Foundation Park. So that existing appropriation is there to, for us to build as many arterial streets as we can. But we also know there's just the rate of growth and development is picking up in Sioux Falls. So this additional $4 million when Director Pritchard asks us, where's our pressure points when we've got development on multiple sides of the city. We say it's the arterial street. It's the backbone, what moves the traffic. And so it would supplement that funding so we can get through more on that existing list. And some of the, one of them that has really emerged, we work closely with the school district of Harrisburg, was they needed to find a high school location, preferably 80 acres. I think they ended up buying just over 75. It's half mile south of 85th and Cliff. And so we also know that Cliff Avenue is a key commuter route for Harrisburg, Worthing, Northwest Iowa. So that one, for us, and we also have a major power pole line that has to get moved. But that one's one that, where the schools go, same thing happened with Jefferson, which we have great relationships with the school districts, and Jefferson went in what I would consider probably a perfect location from an infrastructure standpoint on that segment of Marion Road, allowed us to move quickly and apply the $6 million there. We're going to have to do the same thing here for the new Harrisburg High School. They want to open a freshman academy by the fall of 23, and then a full high school, probably they've said no earlier than 2027. But just that's one snapshot of that list of we also know there's, with this amount of development, there's a lot of work for the local contractors, and so we also know we'll start to see some price escalation with commodity pricing and a number of other factors. So this $4 million will be a critical funding mechanism so we can carry out what we intend to, what we'd like to be able to carry out.
And I don't want you to hear my questions as questioning that your department should do anything different than you've been doing, because I think as we all move around the city, it's traffic flow, it's making sure our streets are in good condition. And so I certainly support making sure that the arterial street expansion is certainly a priority. Just having it kind of changed in our list as we've seen it were the results of my question, saying, okay, if they already exist in our CIP, like, is this for more roads or not? I just was trying to identify on this list which ones were not identified in our CIP to see if we were maybe we're experiencing higher costs. It happens. There's times where we bid, not me, but you all are having bids come in and it's so expensive, and so you may wait a year on a bridge or until it's more favorable. Same thing with some of the roads and curbs and gutter. And so I didn't know if we were seeing the higher commodity price that we're not able to do as much with the money that we have, or kind of trying to work through that.
Well, I think one of the projects on that list, you'll see 57th Street from Veterans Parkway to 6 Mile Road. That's actually toward the end of the list, but we're seeing so much development out there. So we wanted to move that one up, get it designed, and do what we call a grading and utility project this year. The design has also informed us that we're going to have to make substantial modifications to the overhead power out there. So that's particularly one. It's on the list, but it's emerging as a high priority, and so this additional $4 million will. And the nice thing we like to do about that one today is a 2-lane gravel road. Same thing with 69th Street down by the Harrisburg, by 69th and Sycamore. A lot of pressure down in that area. Our strategy to try to build roads that last longer is to do a grading and utility project the first year, let it go through a freeze-thaw cycle, and then come back the next year and do a surfacing project. And then there's also very little impact to traffic out there because it's a gravel road today, but it'll position that road perfectly with the development that's coming. So, I could probably talk about every project on there. Roads is what we do, but would appreciate your support of this additional funding.
And I appreciate your insight into some of that. We've been talking about that North Marion Road that's serving Foundation Park as such a key road, as Foundation Park is seeing some substantial growth out there and will continue to see substantial growth. And so that obviously is an important one that was tried to get some additional funding at the legislature level and unfortunately didn't come. So, we need to solve those problems ourselves. I have more, thank you so much, I appreciate it. I have more questions, but I'm gonna stand by for now and see if they're asked by somebody else.
Thank you. Councilor Jensen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is on the arterial streets as well, and I think it just as a highlight. So as you look at the Veterans Parkway and 41st Street, you have a crossing there into two new schools that I think was on the news the other day. Brandon has a elementary and Sioux Falls has a middle school over there. I think we need to, while we're also looking at this and investing in those arterial streets, keep that in mind, because although we need to get cars over the train track at Marion for safety, we need to get kids across, you know, Veterans Parkway, South Dakota 100 as we go. You know, if it's a priority of ours, which I know that is, but that's just maybe a comment to you to keep on the forefront. And then with the 57th Street and Veterans Parkway, as that gets developed, will that connect into that Line Drive neighborhood? Because there's a lot of pressure on 41st Street to handle those apartments there and then those all of those areas. So that'd be my question to you is, will we eventually be able to get some of that traffic out to the south rather than all to the north?
Thank you for the question. Yes, the answer, you know, if you look at that entire box from 26th Street, Veterans Parkway at 26th Street over to 6 Mile Road, and then south to 57th Street, you're going to see that entire 2 square miles mature probably in a relatively short period of time. So for us to, we made the choice to, let's improve 57th Street first, allow some of those local and collector streets to get built to the south as that land matures. And then we've already seen development want to jump over that 6 Mile Road. And so then we'll likely start from the north and start building 6 Mile Road south. So the city's, you know, about 10 plus years ago, working with the developers, the bankers, planning and zoning, we really took a look at what involvement does the city have. We still had involvement in minor and major collectors. The developers have taken all that on in exchange with the platting fees. It's the city's role now to actually build the arterial streets with development, and the program's working really well. But as you see, once you see and just track that area mature, you'll see that entire 2 square miles get framed out with arterial streets, and then all the local streets will get built accordingly.
Thanks for that answer. And this is just a general comment, Mr. Chair. I'm excited to see us be able to use federal funds as a way of our good stewardship in the city of Sioux Falls to accomplish some of these things, because then what that does for us is it allows us to utilize those for other projects in the CIP for roads and infrastructure. It's a really big deal. And then all of the other stuff that we had in front of us, the private-public partnerships for some of our park stuff, and Director and I have talked about this before, is this is the wave of the future. If you don't think the public and the private funds are going to come together, you ought to be kidding yourself, because this is paving the path for the future. And I'm excited to see that happen in this $10 million, $11 million, and then for us to make sound, wise decisions with the remaining funds if there are any more. So thank you guys and individuals for your work. Thank you.
Thanks. Councilor Starr.
Yes, thank you. Director Pritchett, if I could, give me an idea. We've seen the county's national trade associations come up with some kind of preliminary numbers. What are we looking at with American Rescue Plan? I mean, is there, I get the rules are being drafted, but I mean, are we talking a couple million? We talking 100 million? I mean, what are we hearing?
The estimates have been, and it's a little bit different this time. So last time when we received CARES Act, it went through the state. This time it would, because we're a large enough city, we've been designated direct funding. The amount that's been preliminarily talked about is about 25 million. But what they haven't determined is exactly what the rules are going to be around that money. And I say that 25 million with some
caution.
What they've told us, yes, is that the Congressional Research Service came up with the numbers, but they forgot certain towns, and they've double counted certain towns, and that threw off their distribution, and it's all based on these distribution formulas. So, but I think that probably gives you a pretty good range. But again, we don't exactly know. While the bill had provisions as to how they anticipated the utilization of that funding, it really was up to the Department of Treasury who took broad discretion when it came to the CARES Act in writing the rules. Over the next several months, we'll be watching that carefully as Treasury, again, will be writing the rules in regard to this funds. The other thing that I would point out is, very broad, not unlike the CARES Act, but even more so, a lot of programming specific dollars were attached to the American Rescue Plan. And so as we look at it, we have to look at it from the whole piece, and we have to look at, okay, when we're allocating funding, we want to make sure that we're not allocating funds to particular initiatives or projects that we could be capitalizing on specific allocations that are being made. There are allocations made for shuttered venues, there are allocations made for restaurants, there are allocations made to the state for rental and housing assistance. And so we just have to be cognizant of the whole bill and understanding where we could be strategically putting our investment in a way that maximizes the amount of funds that we would receive.
Great, and then I had a question either for you or for Councilor Selberg. I was just curious with the 500,000, are we looking, is this that it would be used? Let me back up. Because we're giving it to the community foundation or investing in the community foundation, is this a one-time or is this an ongoing, or are we looking at just spending because normally when we set up a foundation with the community foundation, you're spending part of the proceeds and that it's a perpetual fund. So I guess I'm trying to get a feel, are you looking for something perpetual? Is this, because the example you used was, would it help 500 people at $1,000 or whatever the numbers were? So I guess I was looking at the overall intent of how to.
I guess we're looking at it as a one-time investment, and then hopefully, stay tuned. I'm hoping it's something that can maybe be self-sustaining to a point where if it's done right, we lay it out the right way and it picks up some momentum. I'm hoping it's something that can kind of fund privately and see what our options are as we go. So is that the right answer? The answer is it's not something we're going, well, here's the first chunk and we'll be back in 6 months for another 500, that type thing. It's a one-time.
And to kind of add on to that too, I think it would be very similar to the One Sioux Falls Fund, where the intention is not necessarily that it becomes a trust asset or something where you're only spending the interest income off of it. In this case, the intent is to be more like the One Sioux Falls Fund, where it would be drawn down over time to support it over several years. But by using the community foundation as a venue for that, our general fund doesn't work well when you're talking about multi-year projects. You have to continually reappropriate things. So that's the purpose of working through the development fund, or the community foundation for that.
Without getting too far into the weeds, but so wouldn't it just make more sense to make that contribution to the link, which is going to have a separate budget and they have their own separate nonprofit? And what's the advantage of running it through the community foundation rather than giving it to the people who are going to administer the funds?
Actually, the link doesn't have its own accounts technically. Everything is vested at the community foundation. So right now they're serving as somewhat the fiduciary agent for the link, the triage board over. And then, of course, obviously, Avera will manage their own accounts. But so that's one of the reasons for doing it with the community foundation as well. They don't have direct accounts to put it to.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Want to see if Councilor Brecky has any questions, and then I'll go back to Councilor Erickson. Yep.
I do not. I appreciate the questions everyone's asking, and I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Thanks. And we want to make sure we keep watching the clock. We're going to have to stop shortly. Councilor Erickson.
Mine's more of a statement than anything. I know Councilor Selberg was looking for kind of a consensus if there was support for this. And, so many times we all like to use the word mental health and mental illness, and this is putting our money where our mouth is and truly doing something to remove that stigma and helping those folks that truly need it. And so I'm excited about that and adding that to our list. I'm also super grateful, Sean, you spent many hours with us walking through, talking through, and discussing all of these projects, many that didn't maybe, I won't say see the light of day, because they did. We discussed them, and we just decided collectively to not move forward with some of those. Doesn't mean that they won't be funded in years to come, and they're all worthy projects. I do want to also just say thank you to our staff has walked alongside us as well and making sure that we've got the information that we need. And then lastly, the public-private partnerships is incredible. We've got a super generous community, and being able to really capitalize on those additional funds is key. And in the end, it frees up more money for roads, frees up more money for infrastructure and things that we need when people are willing to give and support our community and moving those things forward. Not sure people are going to give, sorry, Mark, to you and saying we'd like to donate money to the funding of arterial roads, but in the end, when funding is given to other projects, you certainly win as well. And so I'm excited to move forward and continue the conversation as we get more money. And then also at some point, I would love to have a presentation talking about the appropriations from the legislature, what Sioux Falls got, maybe what we tried to get and didn't get, but as we all saw, we got the $3 million for triage. There was, I believe, $4 million put into the watershed, as well as many other things that we'll see some great things coming forward in Sioux Falls. So things that shouldn't go by the wayside, and hopefully that we can have a presentation talking about those funds as well. So thank you.
All right, I will just wrap real quickly with a couple of comments. First of all, I do want to reiterate, I thank you for taking us along as a council in consultation and in coming up with these priorities. This doesn't always happen. Sometimes we were brought in at the end and we were brought in at the very beginning. This was a partnership and this is a big deal. I do want to tag along on what Councilor Jensen said. Walkability has been really important to me for a long time, and I know it is to Public Works, and it's tough. So, but I think it's important as a council that we do what we can, because it costs money to make things walkable. It costs more than just building just a simple road, but we need to be thinking about pedestrians. And with that, I was just at a bicycle committee meeting last week, and I was excited to see that it doesn't mean it's going to happen, but they're at least conceptually working on it through the environmental design, the pedestrian underpass possibility over at Cliff Avenue at the interchange, and there's actually a thing. And when you look at an interchange like that, that is, no matter what you do, it's going to be very inhospitable to walkers and pedestrians, and that is a heavy area that people would go to get on the bike trail. So to maybe put the money into something like that and then show that it works will be a big deal. So I'm excited to see if that comes forward. And the Highway 100 issue, hopefully we can figure out what the right solution is to that, because it's a fast road, so there's always that balance of trying to get people there as fast as possible, but we have kids going to school and people who want to use the roads. So with that, we're going to move on to, thank you for the presentation. Thank you everybody for coming. We're going to move on to public input. Anyone who wants to comment on what we talked about for up to 5 minutes, come forward. Seeing none, this meeting is adjourned.